In my language, yat e abine, not what I sing, station there. Could oh, da hajil zishidani, what about Hansen? Sadish Gizninshle. Now, create the net. Is it land? Let me back it up. Sadish Gizninshle. Ye the net trachini, that's je. Now, create the net, that's che. Is it land? That's nulle. Sedel don't hold ya, I did not sha. Now, if you did not hear a single word of what I said, I'm sorry, but that's my language. And I think if we all speak our language, those of us who speak the same language can hear it. If you don't speak the same language, we don't hear it. And since this language is about you and me and how we come together and share our commonalities, I'm going to be talking about that. So let me tell you, I'm going to stick to as much as I can to the English language. And let me give you a little bit of myself to kind of, in the world of research, you start to talk a little bit about what makes you legitimate to talk about what you are going to be talking about. So I'm not a linguist. I don't do research on languages, but I have done research on social cultural change, not only here in the United States, but in other countries. And so I'm familiar with some of how that happens and how it's happened in many countries. And but language has always been a subtle part of how social cultural change happens in many other cultures. And that's what I'm familiar with. And so what I want to do in the next hour or so is to give you a sense of what I'm putting together in terms of what I'm seeing in tribal schools. And I talked about, I asked about language in tribal schools. And tribal schools, what do we mean by tribal schools? These are schools that have been introduced to our people. In my case, the Net people or Navajo people. And this has happened everywhere in the United States with many different tribes. And currently there are about 183 tribal schools remaining. Many of these schools were originally what we call, and the dreaded term, boarding school. That's what they were initially. Many of those schools have now been gone, and many have evolved, and many of them are now run by the tribes. Those are called tribal schools. There's several groups of them. There's contract schools and grant schools. Contract schools are those educational programs in these communities have been contracted by the tribe or by a local organization. In other words, the tribe has more decision-making over how these schools are run. It's similar to grant schools. Now, there are also, there's a third component of this. They are called BOS schools, Bureau-Operated Schools. There's not many of these, but these schools are operated and controlled and funded by the federal government. And so all of these schools, these three categories of schools are funded by the federal government. And some of them are operated by the tribe. So what do I do? Why do I know all about this? Well, and about 4 years ago, I have been a professor and been traveling all over the different countries and with my students. And so about 4 years ago, I decided I think I've had enough of this. I've been doing this for so long. And I said, I'm going to, quote unquote, retirement. I don't know if that's a term that I want to use, but it sounded like a good idea, something like, hey, I want to stop working. I want to do my own thing. That lasted 6 months before somebody says, we need your help. Can you come over here? And so I've been in this position for about 4 years now, and where I'm looking now at these language programs in these schools and saying, how can I help you improve? What can I do as a resource? Because now, as I say, I am a representative of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. No shame in saying that. And my friends say, oh no, Tim, you've gone to the dark side. I guess I do represent the dark side. So if you are a Begaye devotee, you don't like those terms. If you are like me, new and still trying to figure out what the government represents and how is a part of our lives and everyday lives, then you begin to say, okay, you question all of that. And that's what I've always been about, is questioning what role the government has in our lives, and in this case, in education. And so my job in the last 4 years to travel to schools in Maine, in Florida, Louisiana, in Washington, North Dakota, South Dakota, looking at tribal schools and their language programs and saying, how is it going? What sort of resources do you need? And I've learned a lot about that. And some of the data, information that I've gathered from that, I'm going to be showing to you. But the context for that, again, is where do I get my information? What do I know about languages? As I said, it's more about culture, social cultural change that I've been involved with in several different countries, but also studying these kinds of topics in different countries. Let me give you an example. If you're familiar with Eastern India, many of the in Eastern India, there's still a lot of indigenous communities. Indigenous language and cultures are still practiced. And if you're familiar with that area, you have on one side Myanmar. On the north side, you have China. And on this side, you have India. But the central part of the high population part of India is more on the western side. But if you go further into the woods, into the mountains, into the jungles, you're talking about northeastern India. And that's where you will find indigenous communities, very interesting people. And when I visited these communities, one of the things that comes very clear is that they too, like us, like you and me, have been colonized by Europeans. But long before we were colonized here. So think about that in terms of time. What is happening to us happened to them much longer, generations before us. And what is going on there? Well, these people do not speak their languages anymore. They now speak a different language. And the other language that they speak is English. Why do they also speak English outside of the common language that's being used? Colonization. You know that. We know that. So I asked them questions about your history, indigenous history, your cultural histories, the Mizo people, the Naga people, all along there. I asked them about their history. For many of them, their history stops in the 1910s, 1920s. And I was like, wait a minute, you guys are people before that. And they're like, no, our history starts in 1920. Why is that? Again, because of colonization. So you see these kinds of changes in culture in terms of attitudes about culture and people. It happens there. It happens in other countries as well. It happens in Korea. It happens in China. It happens in Mongolia. It happens in Australia. And these are some of the places where I've traveled to look at how change has happened. Now, bringing that here to the United States, we all know it all began in the East. And it worked its way to the West. It just so happens that we, me, my people, our people, the Nene and Navajos as the term is used, we are still, I look at the language and culture of our schools and in our communities from the East Coast to the West Coast. Interestingly, our language, Nihizad, Nihiel, Tanil, Inni, all of that, Nihizad, that who we are and how we see things in our language and our culture, we, the Navajo people, is still very much alive. And as Patrick was saying earlier, looking at the degrees of which language loss, language shift is happening, we, us, our people, our language is still very much alive. I look at other schools in other states, theirs is way down. In one school, in one community, I won't mention which one, but I was asked about how do we teach our language now? There's nobody who speaks it. And I'm at a loss. I don't know. I don't do research on language, but I do know that it's going to be difficult for you to teach this language if you don't speak it and nobody else in your community speaks it. And I am like, that's sad to say, sad to see. And in some other communities, it's more like we have one elder and 2 or 3 elders in our community that can come in to our schools to teach it. And so this elder has had no teaching experience, has no formal kinds of education, as we call it. And so thus, the rules and policies of the Western education system that we have in place now prevents this elder from being a teacher in the schools. Those are the barriers. But so now, let me go, before I continue, I know I'm going to talk all day. I can talk all day about all of this. So let me go into this. And as I give you some of this information, excuse my commentary editorializing on the side, because that's what I do. I can't keep myself out of what I'm seeing here. The data that I've gathered, I'm going to try to talk about it by try to keep my editorializing out of the way. So, right here, back there. Can you see this? Oh, jeez. I don't know how to address this. The room is too big for this screen. We need a screen that goes all the way to the ceiling. But you'll see what I did was I say yate, dagote, over there. I try to represent as many different cultures and languages in this. Buenos dias, gorai, konnichiwa. Many of you, this is familiar. Bonjour, and there's different ways of saying bonjour, and I see that amongst our people. And interestingly, and then Anan Hasio, and you're familiar with that. I spent some time in her country, and that's where I learned a lot of this. But let me talk about this. The theme here for this conference is about our language, our indigenous language in 50 years, an optimistic vision. Some of the information I'm going to give you is going to be doom and gloom. Some of it is going to be more optimistic and hopeful. So bear with me. I'm not all about doom and gloom. I think we have some hope and some opportunities and ways in which we can begin to address language issues in our communities. And so I just want to give you some information. I kind of addressed this already here to show you some of the challenges, that unveiled itself when I look at these communities. So the big question here, this is part of the reasons why we are all here. How do we envision the health and strengths of our languages in 50 years? It's like 50 years, I'm going to be over 100 years old. Who's going to be 90 out there in 50 years? Just raise your hand. Okay, yeah, so a few of you. Most of us are going to be much old. We're going to be 100 plus years old. And here's the other big question. Are we producing the next wave of language-speaking families, which is what is necessary to keep vital languages alive, vital and actively used in the communities? Are we? Some of us will say yes, some of us will say no. I know that. What other plans and strategies must we implement to ensure that our languages are being used in daily life? Again, you can't, with that question, you can't help but go to the doom and gloom side of this picture that we're facing. You and us, me, we are all facing this question. We know the answers for this. And we know that we can do more. And this is where we share some of this information. Now, I can't really talk about other languages and other culture because that's not mine. But I can talk about my people, my language, and my culture. And I can be more blunt about it. I can be more direct about it because I'm looking at my language and my culture from the inside out. If I look at other people's language and culture, I'm looking at it from the outside in. I'm not as comfortable there, and they can throw me out anytime they want. My people can do that too, but I won't feel as bad if they throw me out because I'm all doom and gloom. That's the way it is. It's my people who will do that to me because of language issues that I'm talking about. That's okay. But if it's another language, another culture, that's not really okay because I don't dare go into those areas if I'm going to say anything like that. But this is, look at this. There's several right down here. In 1980, there was a survey that was done. I know you cannot see this. And let me just talk about it. In 1980, there was a language survey that was done amongst our people, amongst the Navajo people. And it showed, and I think Patrick had this chart as well. You could probably see it better than this one here. But back then, about 93% of our people spoke the language, which usually means that they also are familiar with the culture and practicing it. Years later, around 1990, that dropped to 84%. 8 out of 10. Before that, it was 9+ out of 10 people. You see, it's starting to decline. In about 2000, about 76% of our people spoke the language. It's starting to spiral downward. And in around 2010, 51%, 5 out of 10 people of our people spoke the language. You see how it's starting to now, about 2020, thereabouts, it's now 30%. 30%. 3 out of 10 people. Our language is going. Now, what may possibly happen, given that this shift is spiraling downwards? There's a general trend at about this point. Now it's going to go out here. 100% from here. And then about 1970, it started to go down. And the prediction from this point on is about 2040, about 2045 maybe. The prediction is that our language speaker is going to be 0. Now, don't beat me up for this. I'm just making a prediction based on what we're seeing here in terms of language loss and how that's changing. Now, so what happens in our future? Kind of going to the question, in 50 years. Well, let's look at this. 2020 to about 2070 and beyond. I think this red line, I don't know if you, darn, wish you guys in the back could see this. I think this prediction here, the trend line here says in about 2040 or so, it's going to disappear. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be much slower than that with our language and our culture. Why is that? Because many of us will still be alive. We may not be alive in 50 years, but in 30, 40 years, many of us will be. So the language itself is not going to be gone. We know that. We are going to be still alive. We may be 80, 90 or so years old. We will be alive with our language. Now, how is that happening? With our people, you know now. In our past, we say in our past, long time ago. It's now a long time ago. We used to say, although we don't, that is our language. We still say that with current speakers. But what is really happening? It's changing. We see our young folks saying, Hatish banana. See how that has changed? If you're a language speaker, you're upset. Our elders say, you are not speaking our language properly. You hear that, right? Our elders say that to our young ones. Hatish banana. That sounds strange and weird and funny, right? It's like, what are you saying? Our young kids can understand what that word means and how to say it if they say, hot dish banana. Interesting, huh? It's now, they're starting to pick it up because our young kids cannot pronounce Liz. You try it. Liz. You got to push that air out of the side of your mouth to say that. The TLs. Liz. And my daughter says Liz. See? That's the best way that they can pronounce it. They don't have, in the English language, you don't have that sound. So, back to language shift. You see this happening now. Hot dish banana. And before that it was hatish banana. Before that it was hatish banana. You know, it's interesting to see that trend, see how that is shifting. Linguists will tell you that language is alive, as he said. Our language is alive. Your language is alive. It's going to go through shifts. It's going to go through ebbs and flows back and forth. Eventually, it will evolve. People who study languages talk about it that way. We see it happening with our language. To many of us, saying it this way is funny. But to our elders, they don't think it's funny. And when I explain how our language is changing, they think I'm not funny. I'm not being funny. It just sounds funny the way you say it now. And that's how language is alive, and language goes through this kinds of ebb and flow, shifting back and forth. That's what is happening. And so I'm going to go back to these questions. These are some of the questions that come up. What is happening to our native language? And many of you already know the answer to that. Is the native language being lost? Is it a shift? Is it endangered? Or is this normal? You heard about how it's being endangered. Or is this normal? Because languages go through an evolution of sorts, an organic kind of revolution that happens over time. So, let me continue I know that I'm going to be pushed for time here. What I did was I worked with about 96 tribal schools. And in addition, there are several others, and all a total of, I think, around 183 tribal schools. What I wanted to do was to get a sense of where is the language in these communities? Is it being taught? And what are some of the challenges that they are facing? So I began with questions like, okay, who took this survey? And so basically a number of different people in these communities, they took turns putting these surveys together. And the big question, does your school offer a native language program? Most of them says yes, they do. They have a native language program. Okay, we're beginning to see that they do have a program. How long has this program been in operation? Most of them said that it's been there for more than 11 years. So they have a program, and it's in place for a rather long time. And so the next question is, so what kind of program do you have in place? What kind of language program do you have in place? Many of them said revitalization. And a good number also said restoration. And so when you say, okay, I'll talk about this later, but let me just introduce it. When you say revitalization, it means that the language was there, and it's now being revived. And either the language was already there, or parts of it, it's now being built, rebuilt, recreated in that way. And that's how they. And then the next question: in your school, how long is the native language in your school being taught to these kids? You'll see that kids in kindergarten up to about sixth grade, they spend about 30 minutes per class. 30 minutes per class in a whole day. Think about that. And in the 7th and 8th grade, they spend about 40 minutes per day. And in high school, it's a bit longer, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 hour. Sometimes it's more. So we're seeing now a good picture of what goes on in these schools. Okay, now the next question is, how many times a week are language classes offered? You'll see over here Most of the schools says 5 times a week. So for them, it means the elementary school, 30 minutes per day, 5 times a week. Add that up. For 7th and 8th grade, 40 minutes per day, 5 times a week. Add that up. High school, 60 minutes, 5 times a day. Add that up. Okay, let me just make a comment here. A good number of them say 4 times a week. But also notice that a good number say anywhere from 1 to 2 times a week. It's offered for 30 minutes on Monday. It's offered again 30 minutes on Wednesday. That's it. Are all your students required to take the native language program? %82 says yes. I know in tribal schools, grant schools, and contract schools, tribal government has mandated that all their children are taking the language. So this is what the tribe is doing. They're doing what they can. You're beginning to set this image of them. What is going on in these schools? Are students instructed in their native language in the general education classroom? In other words, outside of the language-only classroom, are language and culture being offered? A good number of them say no. In other words, at these schools, only native language was available to the kids in the native language class. It's not available in any of the other classes. Interesting. Now, I ask, is your teacher certified? And I know that this topic came up more than once, and I know that Patrick mentioned that earlier too. 39 schools said, no, none of our teachers are certified. And that may be where the elder is teaching. And 54 schools says only one teacher is certified. And it drops drastically from here. On 20 schools says 2 of their teachers are certified. And about 12 schools says 3 of them are certified. From there on, the rest said no, they're not certified. Interesting to note about certification. We'll come back to that. This is the more the political part. How many teachers are recommended for certification by the tribal government? In other words, does your tribe certify your language teachers or not? And how many of your teachers are qualified to pass that test? Well, again, 0. 46 schools said 0. Either they don't have a tribal certification program, or the certification program is too stringent and teachers cannot pass. Interesting to note that. A large number also pointed that only 1 is recommended. In other words, those teachers who want to teach cannot really teach. Who decides how the language development funds are used? In other words, there's funds available for these programs. it turns out that it's any number. The principal apparently makes the decisions, and the school board, and the native language teachers. And there, it's really interesting. There's just a number of people have a say in how funds are distributed and all of that. So, and then comes, have your teachers received professional development for culture and language? This was pretty much evenly distributed. Many of them says, yes, we do. And a smaller number said no. But then there's another large group that says somewhat. I'm not sure how to make that out, somewhat, professional development. I'm not sure if they understood my question. But, and then, so what kind of professional development would your teachers benefit from? In other words, you have teachers who are not certified and all of this. What would your teachers benefit from? What sort of professional development would your teachers benefit from? Interestingly, many of them says, we want to learn how to teach a language. We may know the culture, we may know the language, but how do you teach it? Very basic as, your thinking is probably, well, that's really basic because that's what you learn when you are going to school for learn to do. No, it's a little bit challenging as we all, I think, are beginning to learn. Curriculum development. They want it. The interesting thing that comes up is classroom management that they're looking for, that they want and they asked for. Classroom management. That points towards a different area. Behavior. I wonder why. Many of them talk about, we just want to learn phrases. We just want to learn vocabulary. We just want to learn very basic things. In these places, yes, we can. In these schools, yes, you can. But is that how a language can be acquired and learned and used in your community? Many of you will say no, but we'll talk about that as we go along. Interesting to note that they wanted some really basic teaching tools, real basic teaching techniques, from lesson planning to curriculum development. Really basic. Interesting. Then comes the final question. What sort of assessment do you use when you are assessing your students, and how do you measure learning in your classroom? That's what this comes down to. Most of them says it's verbal, it's oral. If you're a teacher already, you already know that's usually set in stone. You assess your students based on a curriculum that's established. But these ones, it's oral, it's verbal. In other words, it's not written, or it's not established as part of the academic curriculum in the schools. Interesting to note there. At this one here, the second one, tribe, school districts, and BIE Central. That guy's over there. BIE Central right there. They have a say. There's this perception there, I think. I mean, I'm pointing to him because I work with these folks, and I think I'm the one who's on the dark side, and I think they're looking to me to make me respond when they say that. Some of them say it's mandated by the Bureau. It is not, actually. But again, there's this misperception, probably a miscommunication about how that happens. So let me continue on here. So I know that I'm going to be pushed for time. Now, I learned a lot from asking the teachers questions. And I know you're saying, okay, well, you're Begaye, and you've got all kinds of gripes against who I represent. And that's, I think, it's okay, it's fine. But what is really going on in the classroom? What is really happening to our languages in our schools and in our communities? And this is where usually it's the questions, everybody's ready to go like this, raise their hands. But let me, oh no. I don't know what happened here. I think I'll try to remember what I had for the rest of my slides. We've been talking about language, where it is and where it's going. The data shows that trend that's going downhill. Language loss or language shift is happening. We know it. Along with language is going the culture that's associated with the language that's being spoken. It is going as well. Now, one perspective is to say language loss is happening. We're losing our language. We're going to lose our language and it's going to be gone. Another perspective is to say language shift is normal. It happens because languages are alive. It has a life. It has a beginning and it has a sort of ending, which is usually that's the transitional point of making a different, evolving as a different kind of being, if you will. So that's another way to look at it. And when I look at our people, my people, language teachers out here, we all have the same concern. It's shifting, we're losing it, and it's changing. How must we begin to transfer that knowledge to our young kids? What we know is that if we just offer it today, it's just going to be there. If you ask for you're doing a presentation and nobody shows up. We offer language courses and we have to mandate that our children take it. We're at that point. For many of us, it's like, what can I do? I'm going to give up hope. I don't want to give up hope. Some of us have already. Some of us have made that transition into the larger Western world. We speak only English. We prefer to stay in fancy Hilton hotels. We have to take showers every day. We can't live without our cell phones. And I don't need my language anymore because it's not utilized out there in the larger world. Why should my children learn my language if he or she is not going to use it in the larger world? That's what's going on in the minds of our people, my people. So that's where I'm at with and trying to put this together. What can we do? How can we begin to see that we see this downward spiraling effect? How can we curb it? At least level it out. Think of an airplane going down. The pilot needs to do something to level it out. The pilot needs to do even more to bring it back up. You are the pilot. We are the pilots. How can we do that? We are doing it. You guys, at least my folks here that my people, and we speak our languages here. We know we're trying. We know what we're doing. But we also know we need to do more. Just seeing this happen in our schools, the question then becomes, is 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week, is that enough? And are we all committed to really learning and saving our languages? Not all of us are. Then comes the question, why is it that our children are not picking up our language? It's because we have set the example. It's because we do not speak our language and they see no problems with them not speaking their language. We don't use it at home. Many of the younger parents now don't even speak the language. They live in Phoenix. And I was so surprised one day. When I spent most of my life in ACE. I come back here to the res, and I asked this young person, "Where are you from?" And this young person goes, "Phoenix." And I was like, "Phoenix? You're not from Phoenix." My thinking is, Navajos call the res home. I like when the same idea applied to me. I lived in Boston for most of my life. I've been a professor out there and teaching and all of that. And so when people ask me, I'm presenting at a conference in Chicago or Washington, D.C., and people ask me, "Where are you from?" I'll say, to those people, it's okay for me to say, "I'm from Boston." That's because that's where I called home. But if I have a native audience or a Navajo audience, I do not dare say I'm from Boston. I do not dare to say that. I'll tell them, I'll say, Hard Rock, Arizona. If you're Navajo, chances are you know where that is. If you don't, I have to remind you. Home of the original Hard Rock Cafe. That's where I'm from. So that's what I mean. When our children nowadays, they probably were born in Phoenix, lived all their life in Phoenix, and calls Phoenix home. So when I ask them a question, "Where are you from?" Phoenix. That's how change is happening. That's how the shift is happening. And that's where we're going now. I hate to say it, but that is where we're going. I know, don't beat me up for that, but that's where it's going. Given what evidence we have about languages, it's going in that direction. It now becomes your job. It becomes my job. How do we get that plane from going downward, leveling out, and bringing it back up to that altitude in which we're supposed to be flying at? To some people, that's natural, that's normal. To some of us, no, it's not. That's where we're at today, I think. So, I have a few more minutes, but let me just say that, I have a professor, Ronald Heifetz, one of my great mentors at the Kennedy School, at Harvard Kennedy School. He used to say to me, "Tim, if you're teaching, I taught leadership courses for a long time. So if you have in your audience people who are just listening to you and enjoying what you have to say, that's great, fine. They will have heard you, they will have listened, and they will go on their merry way. And they may thank you. But if you have pissed off your audience, if you got their passions going, you've got their ideas, they're steaming in the air about what you're talking about and what you're conveying, then you have made an impact. You have been able to touch their passions, their feelings, then you made them think about what you're talking about. So if the emotions are running high, that's a good thing. That's how he used to teach me. So, but when I hear you reacting, responding to me, that's a good thing. And I hope that by being blunt and being a little more direct, I've been able to touch upon those passions that say language loss is not going to happen. That's what I try to say to you, but I think that you're saying that already. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to offend you. I am trying to elevate this conversation so that you're able to put some of your own feelings into it, whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, that's okay. That's fine. But the more we're able to come together and share who we are, share our passions, share our ideas, share our feelings, share our language, and share our culture, the better able we are to begin to level that plane out. And I hope that I've been able to do that. And excuse me. One final thing. You mentioned the work that I've been doing, you heard me say something about the work that I'm doing. Part of the work that I do is we support, I work in a collaboration with several other federal agencies, and we provide funds to tribal communities, tribal organizations. In my case, it's for language programs in schools. And my colleagues, they provide, we work together and we provide funds for tribal governments who are looking at language issues in their communities. Living language grants, they're called. As you can see, look at under the federal government under grants. They also provide funds for economic development projects in tribal communities. So again, you can look that up. But in a couple of weeks, this is a plug for my own, I know I'm no shame here. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be beginning the first of a series of 5 webinars. We're going to be talking about language programs in schools, and along with that comes some opportunities for funding down the road. So if you are interested and want to hear, or if you have your school principals or school teachers, language teachers, who may be interested in looking for funds and all that. We're always looking for money, right? There's an opportunity to learn about what happens there. It's under the, you'll see it under the Department of Economic Development, Department of Interior. And if you want more info, just let me know. I think my email address is available somewhere here, right? I can't see it now. The first slide that I had down at the bottom, that was my email address. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for listening and laughing and probably show some of your anger and all that, but that's okay. But thank you so much. That's part of this, all of this. If you don't know, if you laughed your whole time, like they say for athletes, if you win all the time, you'll never know how it is to lose or what that's all about. So if I'm nice and friendly, we're all laughing and having a good time here the whole time, we won't know the other side of that, the passions and the angers and what drives us in these ways and our disagreements and all that. That's a natural part of who we are, and that's how we should move forward. That's my thinking. So again, I don't mean to offend you. Please understand that when I am blunt with you, that is because I'm trying to make a point. And the point is that we are in this together, and we're going to move forward together, and we're going to level this plane out and bring that plane back to its elevation in which it should be flying. Thank you so much.